Does the First Amendment apply here, officers? I mean, assaulted by men in costumes?
No crime! No victim! No crime! No victim! No crime! No victim! No crime!
Taxation is theft. You own yourself. War is murder. The question is, how do we get there?
American dystopia.
What's up, Yang Gang? Today I wanted to bring on a very special guest, and it's someone who I have been following for years, literally. Adam Kokesh, it is an honor to have you on the show, and I want you to just give everybody a quick introduction of who you are.
Well, thank you so much, Russell. I appreciate that. I know somewhere in your description it's going to say Libertarian presidential candidate. And you know, anytime I have to introduce myself as a Libertarian presidential candidate, I throw up in my mouth a little bit, because you really have to be some kind of psychopath to want to be president of the United States, to have this authority over so many other people. And I know that you know this, but I want to make sure we get this out front, kind of like a disclaimer for the rest of this interview, that while it is technically true I'm running for president, because my platform is a peaceful, orderly, responsible bankruptcy of the federal government, which includes me resigning on day one in a process that leaves us with 50 independent states and up to 562 sovereign native nations. I'm not putting it on the ring of power. I'm throwing it directly into the fire. So that being said, who am I? I hope it is relatively unimportant. I'm a former Marine. I volunteered to go to Iraq in 2004 as a reservist going to college. And that was really a critical turning point for me. I was always inclined to be a libertarian. My mom was vaguely liberal and my dad was vaguely conservative, but they were both very much anti-authority and really raised me with a healthy skepticism and a desire to question and challenge everything. And as you know, Russ, that's some would say that's gotten me in trouble over the years, but I would say it allowed me to take on a unique role in my activism that I really have to give them credit for in that, because what I have done in civil disobedience and in standing up to unjust authority in the United States has made me, for a lot of people, someone who has been that bigger brother to a lot of other people, to say, look, you don't have to go along with the system. You can go your own way. And for me, it was going from the Marine Corps, as obedient as it gets, right? Well, depending on, I suppose Uncle Sam's misguided children were a little more disobedient than some of the other branches of the military in the United States here. But to go from that to being an anti-war activist, when I got out, I joined Iraq Veterans Against the War. And that was my leap into full-time activism. And there's something about being in that position to tell your own story where you have this awareness that there are people dying still right now where I just was. And if more people here knew my story, less of them would die. That's pretty compelling, right? I mean, I want to say, that's true for everybody now. That's not just me as a veteran or veterans even, but every human being on this earth who can recognize that we are all victims of this violent, coercive, modern, bureaucratic system of government, this paradigm of forcing our will on each other through the state and helping move past it. So when I got out of the Marines, I joined Iraq Veterans Against the War and fell over backwards into full-time activism with them. I like to joke that I ran away with the circus, touring and telling war stories, but obviously in a productive way where we're encouraging GI resistance, civil disobedience within the military, and then got going with my own civil disobedience and Adam versus the Man after running for Congress in New Mexico in 2010. And I've been a pretty successful online independent media producer since
So, as you can probably tell, right over my shoulder, there's a mask hanging up behind me. So, I mean, I'm kind of in the activism myself, and that's one of the things that drew me to you as an individual. Is in some of your videos where you were confronting police officers and you know, you were holding the Constitution and you're saying, you know, this is what you're supposed to be adhering to. How is it that you don't even know what the fuck that you're even supposed to be upholding, right?
Yep.
And you got all these people, and you've got this society that we're, you know, I look around, and it's not martial law that we're seeing, but it's kind of a soft, it's there, it's right on the border. And it's being left up to a lot of these states as to how much they enforce it. But you look around at that, man.
I think we crossed that line.
Huh?
I think we crossed that line. It's a big, blurry line. You know, is it martial law or is it not? And some would say if it's enforced by the military or military command, and as we have it enforced by governors, it's law by governors, law by the president, by states of emergency. And whether the military person enforcing that law is wearing a blue costume or a green costume is kind of irrelevant. But the critical nature of it is arbitrary enforcement. And just even from the headlines I'm seeing today, like a dude pulled off a bus in Philadelphia by 10 cops. Even some of this, you just look around Facebook, you know, get a sense of how your fellow Americans are responding to this. There was a guy who was going to work today who has an essential job in construction, decided to work Sunday so that he could be more physically distant from his coworkers when the job site was crowded on a weekday. He gets pulled over today, and the cop says, "I'm sorry, it's Sunday. Everybody's not essential today." And you're like, "Yeah, that's martial law. It's not just isolated incidents anymore either. We can't just say, well, there was this freak thing here or this one. No, we are under a state of martial law in the U.S. right now, where law enforcement, whether it's military or regular law enforcement, is able to arbitrarily enforce what they see as appropriate based on the orders of the governor in their state.
That's crazy to think that in America that we've gotten this far, and this is not anything that's really new. I mean, for as long as I've been searching for the truth, I've seen how the police have become more and more militarized. They've become more and more aggressive, less and less smart. You know, and you see that these are the people who are important. And it's like I saw in one of your videos, the cop was like, well, I don't write the laws, I just enforce them. And it's like, bro, you don't even know what you're enforcing.
Yeah. Well, there was one thing you said there that I love you worked in there, Russ, that you kind of glossed over, that they're getting dumber. Like, and if you say it offhand like that, you sound like a cop hater. And I'm not a cop hater. And I don't think you are either, just because you're not a hateful person, right? You know, and we can hate the player, or no, I'm sorry, hate the game, not the player, right? You know, like with cops, you know, some people and a lot of libertarians like to make the case there's no such thing as a good cop because they're all supporting the system. Any good cop today would get pushed out, would get fired. But when you say they're getting dumber, that is by policy. And this is a really important case that I like to reference from Connecticut from, I think it was the late 90s. There was a Supreme Court case that upheld a local police department's right to discriminate against an applicant who was trying to be a police officer because he was too smart.
What? Get into that for a minute. This is the first I've heard of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've covered the story for Adam versus the Man like years ago when it happened. I'd have to look it up to get the details, but no, this is the core facts here is that there was an applicant to be a police officer with a local Connecticut police department, and they found out that they disqualified him because he scored too high on the intelligence test. And he protested and said, this is nonsense. And he took his case to court, and the court upheld that the police department has a right to discriminate against new officers on the grounds that they are too smart.
Wow, that's pretty incredible to think about. But, you know, we see this picture of America. You know, now we see this lockdown with COVID-19, and you're looking around, and you know, one thing that we cover is what we like to call the broke folk vote. And that's all the people who it seems like society is leaving behind for whatever reason. You know, the discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And poor people are just getting poorer. Where we used to have a middle class, now there is no middle class. How do we go from where we are right now to something better?
You know, it's interesting that you say it that way, because I have, in my recent understanding of, you know, what's going on with COVID-19, and I, by the way, don't call it that unless you're referring to that virus specifically, because then you're playing their game. Well, now it's COVID-19. Now it's COVID-19S. Now it's COVID-19L. Now it's COVID 2020. Now it's COVID 1984. Like, oh no, I have to keep up with the people who are, no, you called it it's the coronavirus. I'm not playing their silly games. But one of the things that we see in the analysis of the economics, it's the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. You know, and there's no way around it. When the government spends $2 trillion or, you know, adds $6 trillion of liquidity, who benefits and who suffers? And they want to distract you with smoke and mirrors. They want to make it sound way more complicated than it is, or we're doing this for your own good, that kind of thing. And you know, the idea of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, you said that the people who society have left behind. And when you say it's the poor getting left behind by society, part of me wants to resist that language, you know, because it's almost like I've been voluntarily poor as an activist for most of the last 13 years of my life since I got out of the Marines, putting everything that I have into my activism. The only exception to that is here where I live now. I have 11 acres off grid, and I spent $13,000 on it. That's like my one major asset in life. And I think there are a lot of people who are sort of poor by choice at this point, you know. And I don't want to discount the economic suffering, so excuse me for you know, phrasing it that way, but I want to put it almost in more empowering and sympathetic terms, to say there are a lot of poor people in America today who have been left behind, who are not being valued by the current economic system. And instead of fighting it, they're like, you know what? We'll just live comfortably on the fringes, you know, like, and that fringe of society, and that's both all the people on fixed income, the truly economically challenged who depend on welfare, but there's a whole host of people who are being pushed into that because we don't want to play along. Like, do you really want to go suck corporate dick for a paycheck? Like, do you like, if that's your only option, would you rather, you know, just sort of be like, hey, I'm going to be on the fringe of society. I'm going to do a podcast and a YouTube channel, or I'm going to work under the table, right? And right now, it's the service industry. It's waiters and bartenders and service people all over the country who are hurting the most. And it's time to build a new economic system, to say, screw this old system that is designed from top to bottom for the rich to get richer and the poor to get poorer. Fuck that. Get rid of it. Overthrow the whole thing. So, you know, I know you're coming at this from a perspective with Andrew Yang and the Yang Gang and universal basic income. And I have to say, as much as I despise a lot of the statism and coercive policy behind the Democratic Party and even Andrew Yang, for him in particular, I have a lot of respect in that he is trying to do something fundamentally different. But UBI is the wrong way to go, at least the way that he's proposing it. And keeping the dollar system and the fundamentals of an unjust economy in place is wrong. if you have the power, if you're elected president, to say, I'm going to throw the ring in the fire, or we're going to get rid of the U.S. dollar system, we're going to stop backing up this fiat currency with the violence of government. I know a lot of people in the Yang Gang, people who are paying attention, who are looking at these economic issues, know what I'm talking about. For a general audience, I know this would go over most people's heads, right? Russ, you get it. I assume most of your audience gets it when I'm talking about monetary policy and this bigger economic picture, and being like, no, push the smoke and mirrors out of the way. Look at the heart of corporatism and militarism and fiat currency, central banks, that it all has to go together. If you say, hey, well, I'm going to keep that system fundamentally going, and I'm going to give everybody an allowance and call it UBI, oh no, you're just pushing more people to that fringe where the UBI is all they have, and now they're hangers on, and they're still being pushed out. They're being turned into cattle or children or people on a reservation. You know, this is the fundamental difference. Sorry, Russ, if I'm jumping ahead in the interview here. I know this is something that you wanted to get to, but I want to propose before we get any further into this, I'm going to take this opportunity as a good segue here, talking about the economics of COVID-19, to talk about the alternative that I'm proposing, which is tokenized redistribution of assets through AmeriCoin, where we give you your wealth back, your inheritance, your fundamental right to equitable access to natural resources that has been taken from you by this system. So we're going to issue every single American by Social Security number 1,000 tokens of AmeriCoin. And that's the only currency that we will accept for the assets of the federal government that get liquidated, including $200 trillion worth of land in the western states. 50% of the land assets the government claims to own. That's something that the people should have a right to, that is being kept from us by government. This is going to be a fundamental shift in the system, giving the American people an asset-backed currency that is going to replace the fiat currency system we have today and the entire economy as we know it.
And that sounds incredible, and I follow along with that, and you know, I can sit here and I can say, well, you know, that sounds really good, right? But we seem to be locked into this two-party system, and it's like, you know, I see that you have, you know, this awesome idea, and I would love for that idea to be implemented, but we got the left versus the right, Democrat versus Republican. How do we get out of it?
I got the answer for you there too, Russ. And it's really easy. It's so simple when it comes down to it. And this comes from libertarian principles. I love quoting Larry Sharp on this, who said a libertarian is someone who says you can be as liberal or as conservative as you want, as long as you don't force it on anybody else. So how do we get to a world where you have a right to live with a government or no government at all, but to have a system based on your values set up to meet your needs, that you can opt out of it anytime if you want? That's consensual. We value consent, right? If you're being forced into a political system without your consent, then your rights are being violated. I'm against any non-consensual relationships. So how do we get there? Localization. And it's amazing how localization cures so many of these diseases that we're experiencing today. Localization is the cure for polarization. We get rid of the federal government, and by the way, it's almost an embarrassingly moderate proposal to say that we're going to get rid of 3 million government employees out of 22 million who work for government at the state, federal, and local level combined in the U.S. Less than 1 in 7, and a lot of those are going to get absorbed by the state. But when states can be independent, when governments can split off, when we have the true laboratories of democracy that the founders of this country advocated, when we have a decentralized as opposed to a centralized system, right away, government becomes more customized, more transparent, and more accountable. That's what you get with government localized down to the community level, and that's the ultimate goal of localization.
But it sounds to me like, okay, you know, I'm trying to extrapolate this picture, and trying to envision this society that you've created, you know, were you to become president of the United States. And it seems
Should
like
the American people decide we're not going to put up with this shit any longer?
and that sounds good.
And this is a global phenomenon. So I want to just a little point to insert here. I'm sorry, Russ, to interrupt, but it's not about me. It's about localization. And if the people decide that this is what they're going to do, this is what's going to happen. And this is the global trend towards decentralization. Brexit, Catalonia, Scottish independence vote, Exit, Hawaii, Alaska independence movements. All over the world, people are saying, you know what? We don't want to be forced into your system anymore. We're going to opt out.
So every state would have its own power, and the rest of everything else would go away. But it seems to me like in the long run, it would just be and end up being a fight for territories again, as states would want more power, more influence. How not?
Well, so there are a lot of things that I could get into to deconstruct the premises of your objection here, right? You know, if we have the worst wars in modern history have been not by small local governments. They've been by massive governments dropping atom bombs and firebombing Dresden and committing genocide in massive scale. So the idea that local government would go to war is it's plausible. I should say it's possible, but it's almost implausible. As in, it's almost impossible that it could go that way, because governments that are more transparent and more accountable to the people will never submit to a war that is not justified or that is not defensive. You know, you've heard the people naturally don't want war. All they have to be told is lies. It's a Hermann Goering quote from Nazi Germany. But you also know that it's been said, and there's some debate over this, but there's a lot of truth to this, that two democracies over history have never gone to war. What we have in the United States as a representative republic democracy is a nice theory, but when it exists at such a concentrated level of power as in Washington, D.C., we don't have any kind of effective democracy anymore. So getting governments more accountable, more in line with the will of the people means that you're going to have a lot less war.
I can see that. I can see that happening. And if there's one thing that I know is rich people play rich people games. And in order to wake people up, how do we do that on a much larger scale? Because it seems like we've come a long way in the past, let's say 10 years, as far as people waking up to what the government is doing and the bullshit that they've been pulling. And this coronavirus outbreak or whatever is going on here has done nothing but illustrate the ineptness of the people that we have in power even more. Talk about that for a minute.
Oh, yeah. There's a great concern that with this crisis, and just to be clear, I refer to it as the coronaphobia crisis, because the main crisis is one of fear and hyper response. There is a real health crisis underneath this. What we have is comparable to a bad, funky off-season flu that might be 3 to 5 times as deadly, maybe less. We'll see when the numbers finally come all the way down and we see what's really going on. But the bigger threat is the government response. And I think it's very easy to see already that the cure is worse than the disease. Even within that, though, the response to the disease itself has been so inept, and it's like, kick them while they're down. Hey, the American people are suffering? Well, let's screw them over for another $2 trillion. And yeah, some of that's going to go to the American people. Think about it this way. You might get a check for $1,200 if you're lucky, if your paperwork is correct, if you've been filing tax returns, right? And you don't get disqualified on any of their other grounds. But they are going to spend $6,000 per person, and they're giving you $1,200. Well, why not give you all of it and let you decide how to spend it? Make those government agencies crowdfund to keep their budgets. If the airlines want to stay in business, make them crowdfund it, make them adapt. Right now, the government is paying them to fly empty planes around, and you're paying for it, and you're being distracted by this. Look at the monkey, look at the monkey, look at what the left hand is doing so you don't see the right hand going and picking your pocket. And they are so revealing, not just in their incompetence, but they're fundamentally evil. That what they are doing is taking advantage of this crisis to rip you off and enrich themselves. It's sick, and it should be obvious. So while there's a fear that we're never going to be able to flatten the curve of tyranny, you know, the government now has a fear model, and government is just going to take off and keep going. There are a couple other curves, right? The curve of fear of the virus is coming down, and the curve of anger at government is going up. And when those lines cross, I think there's a point where we can take all of this government momentum, all of this asshole work, and say, you know what, we're going to put an end to it, and we're going to have a turning point. We're going to send it in the other direction. So I'm really excited about that. I hope there's not a singular global conspiracy behind this, and I don't think there is. I'm a conspiracy realist rather than a conspiracy theorist. Never ascribe to greed and incompetence, or never ascribe to corruption what can be adequately explained by simple greed and incompetence. And in that case, if that's all it is today, we have this feeding frenzy of fear. And I think if enough people like you keep this conversation going, and you know, kudos to you for making the series happen, then we can have a cool, calm, collected adult conversation and say, no, you know, we learned something today. You know, we learned something from this experience, and we're going to apply the lesson this time.
Well, if you know as well as I do that if there's one thing that our government is good at, is problem, reaction, solution. You know, they are not going to let any kind of crisis go to waste, period. That you saw it after 9/11, you saw it all throughout our history. We've seen this. I mean, there are numerous examples. So
I just realized something about 9/11. You remember what they told us on the first day it happened? They said 5,000 people died, right? And at one point it was 7,000. It was even higher. And then it came down, and it was like, I think the final number was right around 3,000. I mean, even with that, even with just the numbers, like, see, some people say, you know what? It's not fair to compare the coronavirus to a flu. It's worse than that. And like, yeah, you're right. It's more appropriate to compare it to 9/11 because it's touching off all sorts of other violent, illegitimate government action that has the potential to be with us for decades and holding us back for decades if we don't have this moment of awareness out of it.
You can see it in the things that the government is doing, that Trump is doing. It's almost like he's solidifying power, and it's going to spiral off a lot of things that we're not going to like, and they're going to erode our freedoms even more. That's the one thing about it. It's going more and more that direction because it's almost like they feel like they have to have control. And I'm wondering if there's a new generation of politicians that are coming up, people like yourself, people like David Kim out in California, Jonathan Herzog. It's just a different mentality. It's a different generation. No?
No, because, I mean, yes and no, but the people of my mentality generally don't become politicians. You know, we become activists and independent media producers and journalists and entrepreneurs and people who are able to thrive in that economic fringe. Like me right now, I have 3 businesses that I can talk about publicly, right? I've got thefreedomline.com. I've got Adam versus the Man. So the Freedom Line is about my book, Freedom, and my merchandise. I've got Adam versus the Man, my main media production, and I've got Big Igloo Geodesics where I'm building domes. I guess the fourth, I've got my farm here, my property. We call it the Garden of Freedom. And, you know, none of these are registered businesses right now. I don't have an LLC for any of them. I only have one unique bank account for them even. So I would say that, like, what we're doing in raising awareness and showing a better way to live is more important. If anything, I mean, I kind of want to say that what I'm doing politically at this point is like we don't need, the last thing we need is an army of politicians. That's how we got in trouble in the first place, right? No, but what I'm able to do in the political realm is to just bring the awareness of freedom into politics. And libertarianism is not a political philosophy. It's an ethical philosophy. It's you own yourself. Don't hit, don't steal, don't kill, not unless you're an IRS agent or a cop or a soldier. These are universal human ethics. And so raising that...
Yeah, but that's the problem. That's what pisses people like me off. Because people like me sit here and they listen to people like you who talk about this is what we got to do. And the only way that I see to do that is to go in kicking through the front door. And you're talking about how we don't really become politicians. Well, that's the problem. You got to become a politician to change this shit.
Well, that's what I'm doing. And to your point, what I'm saying is I don't need an army of politicians to come with me into DC to pass a bunch of laws and design a new system. I'm saying I'm going in to fire everybody in Washington. Literally, everybody who works for the federal government is fired.
But until you go in,
most of them on.
But you can't do that alone. Until you go in with other people who are like-minded, who are actually willing to get into office to make this shit pass, you're never going to change anything.
Well, this is kind of a semantic argument because I need a team. You know, I need when I sign the one executive order that carries out this process, I resign from the presidency to become custodian of the federal government. So I need a team of bankruptcy agents. I need a custodian for every agency. I need someone to carry out this function and that function and say, all right, with the Department of Defense, we're going to bring the troops home from abroad. We're going to liquidate the offensive weaponry. We're going to apportion the remainder. Okay, what are we doing with the Library of Congress? Okay, this is our records clearinghouse. What are we doing with Social Security? Okay, we're going to fund it for 10 years as an independent institution funded by AmeriCoin until that process is complete and states have better replacements for it, you know, that are going to carry out each function. I don't think of these people as politicians, you know. So Russ, I'm with you. I'm sorry to turn this into like a semantic argument because we still need the will of the American people on board, and that's what counts. That's more important. You know, I ran for Congress in 2010, and you know, now as an you know, and I lost, and I went and I got a radio show and a TV show, and I've reached way more people that way than I would have as a politician. So I'm just trying to make that point that what you're doing and what I'm doing outside of politics and what so many other people are doing as entrepreneurs, as activists, as journalists is more important than playing politics.
But I believe that we live in a day and age where it's possible to do both at the same time. To be serious about getting into these offices, to be serious, because like it's to a point where like I have never considered running for public office, and now I'm considering running against Peter Welch here in Vermont to take his seat, because I'm so fucking pissed off at the shit that's going on in the country that I don't care whether you got a D after your name, an R after your name, an I don't give a fuck. I just want shit to change. And it's going to take people like me and you getting into those offices. So, I mean, to say that you know, we don't need to become politicians, now we can do both. We can do both.
Okay, I'm with you on the point that we can do both. I would just remind you, Russ, that anger is the path to the dark side. And I get that motivation. You know, when I got back from Iraq and I saw children being born with birth defects from depleted uranium and white phosphorus rounds in Fallujah where I was fucking pissed. And I railed against the machine and I protested and I got arrested. And over the years, I've come to this point of being able to step back and put my emotions aside and deal with this in a much more directed, rational manner. And I point this out because I don't want to refute. I'm not refuting your main point that we can do both. Yes, we can. Absolutely. To quote one of my least favorite Democrats, Barack Hussein Obama, right? Yes, we can. Yeah, we can do both. I have no problem with that. In fact, I'm doing both myself, Russ. I'm already doing both, right? When you get to the other side of that anger, you'll be better at both.
It's not so much anger. There is an element of anger, but it's because I've seen the American people oppressed for so long, and it's so frustrating to see. And it's all around us. And we've got to get to a point where we can change all that. So it takes us, and it's going to take us being loud. And so how do we here's the problem, right? Here's the problem that I'm seeing. I'm seeing like the Libertarian Party, which I love. And I'm seeing people like Vermin Supreme. And I'm seeing people, these other individuals who, while I love their message because their message is pure and their message is true, it's almost like the country takes the Libertarian Party as a joke. So how do we get from being considered a joke? Because like I love your ideas and the concepts that you're putting forth. So how do we go from changing the Libertarian Party from this party that America looks as a joke to an actual viable force?
Yeah, well, one of the things I want to point out to all the Yang Gang members out there that there is a huge difference between the Libertarian Party and the Democratic Party. And the main one is that we are a legitimate grassroots party where the grassroots isn't just used to feed into a corrupt hierarchy, but we really are a party of grassroots activists. The total staff of the Libertarian Party is, I think it's less than a dozen. In terms of professional political operatives in the entire country, like, I've got one person on my staff as one of the top competitive presidential campaigns in the Libertarian Party. It's very, very open source. I like to joke that if you go to a county Libertarian Party meeting, you have to be very careful. Because if you get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the business meeting, you might come back and find that you've been made an officer. Like that actually, like I'm exaggerating obviously about going to the bathroom, but no, that happened. Where you go to a county meeting and they're like, oh, you're new here, you want to be secretary? Hey, we haven't had a treasurer for a while. You want to be in charge of the money now? Like I have yet to hear a single complaint about the Libertarian Party that could not be completely solved by the person complaining showing up and doing something about it, even if your complaint is you didn't like the presidential nominee. Gary Johnson barely won the nomination in 2016 by less than 5%, less than 50 votes. That means one person for any of the other serious campaigns, John McAfee, Austin Peterson, or even Darryl Perry, if they had gotten 50 more people recruited and organized to be delegates, Gary Johnson wouldn't have been the nominee. So Russ, it's a little late in this cycle, but if people want to get involved with my campaign and help me win the nomination with a serious unifying principled message that's not just, well, hey, I'm socially liberal, fiscally conservative, or hey, I'm the guy with the funny hat, then get involved. And it's not too late. You can help me out. You can go to my website, thefreedomline.com. You can find kokeshforpresident.com. I know you'll put it in the notes. But yeah, go to my website, get on my email list. It's not too late to help have an impact in this election cycle, to join our team, to show the delegates in the Libertarian Party that this is a message that resonates with people, and then we can bring Yang Gang people in. If the Yang Gang wants to decide who the nominee of the Libertarian Party is right now, if that full force and effort came into the Libertarian Party, you guys could be the kingmakers. The Libertarian nomination is determined entirely by 1,000 delegates, who are super delegates essentially, at our national convention. None of the primaries matter. It's about who shows up to that national convention. And of course, with coronaphobia, it's all a little up in the air right now. It's scheduled for Austin, Texas, May 21 to 25. It might be postponed, but get involved, get on the email list, and then more importantly, long term, outside of 2020, then join your county Libertarian Party. Show up to a meeting, see what it's like. It's probably going to be 3 or 4 dudes in the back room at a restaurant, patting each other on the back about how right we are about everything. But that was really more how the party was about 10 years ago when I was getting started. It's really grown now, and a lot of counties have vibrant, fun monthly meetups. And if your county doesn't have one, organize one, make it happen. And whoever the nominee of the Libertarian Party is, even if it's Vermin Supreme with a boot on his head, I think you would still want to make the point that between pussy grabber and kid sniffer, a baked potato with an L next to his name would be a better president.
Everybody gets a pony is definitely way better. You know what? I would love to see. I would love to see Donald Trump and Vermin Supreme debating. I think that would be like a favorite, dude.
Yeah. I mean, Vermin Supreme is the nominee. The memes write themselves, right? Everybody gets their pussy grabbed. Everybody gets their hair sniffed, or everybody gets a pony. I'll vote Vermin Supreme. Thank you very much.
That is awesome. And yes, I will put all of your links in the description. And you know what's crazy is I am doubly honored because I know that this is Easter, and I didn't even realize that when we were scheduling this that we scheduled it for Easter. So I thank you a whole lot for coming on here and sharing your message.
Well, I'm not, I appreciate it. About the Easter thing. If anybody's looking at the headlines today, the crackdown on churches is nuts. We have our Georgia State coordinator, Stephen McClure, is a pastor who's holding his service today in civil disobedience in Georgia. And there's, I did not expect this. I'm a Buddhist pantheist myself. I've gained a unique respect for Christianity over the years, but I would never have identified as a Christian. But to see that right now, in the middle of the coronaphobia crisis, it's the Christians going, screw you, Trump, we're going to church. They're the ones leading the way in civil disobedience. I love it. I saw a guy covered up his license plate even on Facebook, because what they're talking about doing is scanning everybody's license plate as you go to church so that they can go visit you at home and say, now you have to be in quarantine for 2 weeks. That's messed up. That's martial law, whether it's done by blue costume people or green costume people. That's martial law. And today, to celebrate Easter, I will say a prayer and give a round of applause to all my Christian friends who are going to church in civil disobedience. That is beautiful.
Shout outs to all the Christians out there in civil disobedience. Absolutely. Adam, thank you for coming on, brother. I appreciate it. I hope that we can do this again in the future, because I think your message is so very important. And Yang Gang, y'all heard him. We could be the wave that changes this thing, and we could place somebody up there in this presidential race who could actually make a difference and give power back to the people. So Adam, thank you.
Yeah, right. I just, on that point, I'm sorry. I love this opportunity. To me, this is building bridges. This is so important. But for the people who are fans of Andrew Yang, Make America Think Harder, for those of you who are looking at the fundamentals, stay involved, stay engaged. The Libertarian Party has a home for you. And Russ, let's do this again. Let's say mid-May. Let's check in again as we get close to when the convention is scheduled. I guess, just about a month from now. Let's do this again. And anybody who wants to get involved, sign up for my email list, thefreedomline.com, or email me directly, adam@thefreedomline.com, especially if there are other opportunities to build bridges. Because I want to be really encouraging to all the Andrew Yang supporters to say, don't give up, stay involved.
Well, I appreciate it, Adam, and that's something that is so very true, because Andrew Yang, before he came along, we all came from different parties. Like, I came from the Trump side, the conservative side, although I've always considered myself much more libertarian than that. And, I registered as a Democrat just because Andrew Yang was putting forth the ideas that were all about helping people and helping move humanity forward. And I see that same thing when I talk to you. you're all about that same idea, and you have been since the beginning, since you started this fight. You've always put it back in their face, like, we are the sovereign citizens of this country, or we're supposed to be. You're supposed to work for us. And so I appreciate you very much. Thank you for coming on the show. Let's do it again soon.
Absolutely.
All right, brother. I'm gonna hit